Hi, my name is Peter Nelson. I am president of Nelson Insurance Advisors. We specialize in using non-woke Catholic fraternal insurance companies in order to protect our clients and members, whether it be in regards to life insurance or retirement planning. We have over 23 years of experience in the insurance industry, and we want to do business with people that believe the way that we believe. So please reach out to us at 423-793-2613, or you can find us on our website at nelsonplan.com. God bless and Godspeed.
Yesterday, we saw the beginning of the end of the wait and see to see what kind of papacy Pope Leo would bring. We saw the beginning of the end of it because he decided to weigh in on the controversy involving Cardinal Cupich offering a Lifetime Achievement Award to a heretic Catholic, and we'll put Catholic in quotes here, U.S. Senator named Richard Durbin. Senator Durbin has spent the last 40 years in the U.S. Senate defending the sacrifice of the most vulnerable to the demon Moloch. It's a medical procedure that in 1973 was deemed legal and no restrictions could be placed on it, basically. And then, we fought for this against it for decades until the Supreme Court a couple of years ago said, that 1973 decision was stupid and unconstitutional, and now it's back to the states. And now here we are. That's not the only piece of church moral teaching that a supposed Catholic senator has decided he doesn't agree with. He, being a member of the Democratic Party, has taken it upon himself to oppose the Catholic Church's teachings on virtually everything. And despite all of this, a number of the bishops have been on his side throughout, and that party's side for the last several decades. Yes, this is a partisan issue. You can't really get away from it. And the underlying thing we're going to talk about here is you're going to hear a term called the seamless garment brought up. And so to understand this, before we get to what the Pope said, let's talk about the seamless garment. And to know what that is, you have to know something about Chicago. Chicago has had a whole host of really bad bishops since at least Vatican II. There was one that was decent, Cardinal George, but the rest were pretty bad. And the chief among these bad bishops was a man named Cardinal Bernardin, who it turned out after the fact was likely a McCarrick type himself, right up to some of the accusations that came out after he was gone. You'll notice in this picture here from a website, a blog whose name I can't say the full name of on YouTube. They don't like this word that begins with F. But it's called the Ecclesiastical Stonecuttery, basically. You'll notice this crucifix here is very familiar. It was the emblem of the Bernardin acolytes in the church. Pope Francis made it most famous when he wore one. There are pictures of Pope Leo when he was Cardinal Robert Prevost wearing one as well. I haven't seen him wearing one since he became Pope, but I might have just missed it. Let me know in the comments if you've seen him. But this has become the symbol of them. It's a very weird looking crucifix. But to know what the seamless garment is, you have to know a little bit about Cardinal Bernardin. According to this article, which was published like 3 months ago, Joseph Bernardin is remembered among traditionalists as one of the most notorious members of the American hierarchy, whose evil legacy is still being felt in the Catholic Church. This brief overview aims to explain why knowing the truth about Bernardin is particularly relevant to our times. I'm going to skip past a lot of his, his own bio stuff. He was accused by Malachi Martin in the book Windswept House of being a participant of actual satanic worship. And the person who was the victim of that in the book, because everything in that book was supposed to be real, 95% true, and then just a little bit of fictional narrative to turn it into a story. But the person in the book depicted was a real person. And she came forward later and said, yes, this all happened to me. And yes, said it was Cardinal Bernardin. I know that's a whole topic for another time. But he had been part of the Boys Club of Chicago. He was including the Boys Club, as they called it, a network of James Martin types, known to be wearing that weird pictorial cross that Francis wore. But he is the proponent of what was called the seamless garment and common ground theologies. Here's a summary of it for you. Cardinal Bernardin coined the phrase seamless garment in 1970s. And this ideology, because that's what it is, has been adopted by the church at the highest level since that time. The seamless garment philosophy is that Catholics must hold a, quote, consistent life ethic, meaning they must oppose war, poverty, inequality, environmental decline, and a host of other problems as passionately as they oppose that sacrifice of the most vulnerable to Moloch. Pope Francis famously promoted this ideology when, along with his condemnations of that sacrifice, he also condemned capital punishment. Not long before his death, Bernardin founded the Catholic Common Ground Initiative, a project dedicated to, quote, reconciliation and peacemaking, interreligious dialogue, and the consistent life ethic. Bernardin's Common Ground project, with its focus on dialogue and ecumenism, can be seen as a forerunner of Pope Francis's destructive ideology of synodality. And you can just now replace that with Pope Leo's destructive ideology of synodality. Because on May 8th, when he was elected Pope, the first thing that Pope Leo XIV said to the church was that he was going to continue Francis's reforms and promotion of synodality. This is not even up to debate at this point. He has repeated and quoted Francis so much that it's pretty clear that he's going to keep this going. Now, I told you all that because I want to give you basically what the news was yesterday. And to put an end to basically, for the most part, some of the harder line, we're going to wait and see kind of things from people who were resisting Francis. They are at least starting down the road now, where a lot of us were practically from the beginning. This is Edward Penton. He's a Catholic journalist for the National Catholic Register, not a hardline trad outlet or trad reporter himself. He says, this is the second or third time that Pope Leo XIV has answered questions in a stand-up impromptu exchange with the press like he did yesterday. Previous popes, including Pope Francis, tended to avoid these kinds of off-the-cuff media interactions common to ordinary public figures, preferring instead to limit such unscripted remarks to the papal plane, sit-down interviews, or to give just one or two word answers to journalists. Is this a commendable development or not? Now, many of us had been quite happy to see that it looked like the Pope was going to reject airplane interviews and doing a lot of interviews, and now they've just started coming. And now they're happening faster than they happened under Francis. So buckle up. But we go to Chris Jackson on X for the headline here. Pope Leo speaks up on Dick Durbin's behalf amid the controversy on that sacrifice. If you're not familiar, Cardinal Cupich was going to give Senator Durbin a Lifetime Achievement Award. This caused enormous scandal. It's been the story of the moment for the last week or so. And this is just a quote from the Pope, and I'll go into more detail on what he said. He said, it's important to look at the overall work that the senator has done, the pontiff said amid an uproar over a church honor for the Illinois Democrat. That is seamless garment theology. Got to look at the overall work. There is no overriding issue that stops everything. The church has always said, you could be great as a public servant on a whole host of issues, but if you endorse something that is unequivocally evil, something that cries out to heaven for justice, then it's a deal breaker. The ends do not justify the means. The ends of all those other things you do not justify you being evil, basically. And Senator Durbin promotes an absolutely evil position. So now we go to the Catholic News Agency headline. Pope Leo XIV wades into the Durbin debate. We'll just go over this. Pope Leo XIV responded to controversy over the Chicago Cardinals' plans to honor a Catholic U.S. senator who supports the legalized sacrifice to Moloch, saying that the senator's record should be considered in its totality and that Americans should search together for the truth on ethical issues. Several U.S. bishops condemned Chicago Cardinal Blaise Cupich's plans to honor U.S. Senator Richard Durbin with a Lifetime Achievement Award for his work surrounding immigration policy, despite his voting record to support sacrificing the most vulnerable. In fact, you're noticing, if you've been watching me since last fall, this issue, immigration, is the one that the bishops keep talking about, almost at the sacrifice of every other social issue today, except the environment. Immigration. It has become the preeminent issue in the United States. Here's what the Pope said. I'm not terribly familiar with the particular case of Richard Durbin. I think it's important to look at the overall work that a senator has done during, if I'm not mistaken, 40 years of service in the U.S. Senate, the Pope told reporters on Tuesday in response to a question from EWTN. He said, I understand the difficulty and tensions, but I think as myself have spoken in the past, it's important to look at many issues that are related to the teachings of the church. And this is where it gets really just nasty. Someone who says I'm against the sacrifice to Moloch but is in favor of capital punishment is not really pro-life, the Pope explained. Someone who says I'm against the sacrifice but I'm in agreement with the inhumane treatment of immigrants in the US, I don't know if that's pro-life. So they're very complex issues, and I don't know if anyone has all the truth on them. But I would ask first and foremost that we would have respect for one another and that we search together both as human beings and in that case as American citizens and citizens of the state of Illinois, as well as Catholics, to say that we need to be close to all these ethical issues and to find the way forward as a church. The church teaching on each one of those issues is very clear, end quote. And he is right. The church teaching on every one of those issues is clear. Immigrants have the duty, when they arrive in the U.S., to enter legally, to assimilate, and follow the laws. That's what the Catechism says and has said. The church has said, until Francis changed the teaching on capital punishment, that it's permissible. So I don't know how you're putting the sacrifice to Moloch on the same levels as those things. They also put the environment, widespread unemployment, military action, all these things on the same moral level as that issue. So the wait and see approach appears to be over with him because he's adopting Cardinal Bernardin's position. Now this happened. He chimed in as we hit 10 bishops responding to Cardinal Cupich. One of America's most prominent archbishops has broken his silence to denounce Cardinal Cupich's scandalous decision to honor the Senator Durbin. That's Archbishop Naumann. You've got a bunch of these bishops who decided to chime in. This happened because, as that same X account I was just showing you said, the decision to honor him has drawn criticism from 10 of them, and the backlash is growing. Is now past tense, was growing. Pope Leo speaking up on this is absolutely going to put an end to this. Don't take my word for it. There's Bishop Strickland. Pope Leo just made sure there won't be names added to the list of bishops brave enough to speak the truth and call out Cupich for his betrayal of the truth. As one viewer one person responding to Bishop Strickland pointed out, he said he did more than that. He betrayed the entire U.S. anti-Moloch movement and called his homeland inhumane. He sided with trading the lives of the most vulnerable for open borders. He has torn things asunder. Mr. Unity himself has decided to do the most virulently divisive thing possible. Yes, I think the wait-and-see approach is over. And I know this for a fact because I have a lot of respect for Dr. Peter Kwasniewski. I disagreed with him on the wait-and-see approach. He was one of the more charitable proponents of the waiting-and-see approach, not condemning really those who don't take it, not overtly to my knowledge. And he called it, what Pope said, this is disgraceful. Dr. Kwasniewski's words on here on Facebook, but also on X. Now he quotes the article. Again, in detail. And it is in everything I just read to you a moment ago, because it is disgraceful. It is absolutely disgraceful. There is literally no defending that. I'm sure some will. In fact, some already have. I saw people on X who admitted being Pope-splainers saying they're coming out of retirement now to defend Pope Leo, instead of defending the truth, which is there are some sins that are worse than others, even some mortal sins that are worse than other mortal sins. Scripture makes that clear. There's a whole classification of these that cry out to heaven for justice. And you can really just use some logic to put some things that are pretty commonly done now that Scripture might not have said cry out to heaven for justice as being in that category, like the sacrifice to Moloch. And I keep calling it that, partially because you can't use the A word on these platforms without getting into trouble, but also because people do that because of convenience, to have a better life for themselves. And that is exactly what the ancients did, what the Aztecs did, and what they did at Stonehenge and these other places in history, where eerily similar kinds of practices were being conducted from far-flung cultures to similar kinds of demonic entities for the same purpose. That's why I call it what I call it, because it's truth in advertising. Vatican News on X, Pope Leo releases his prayer intention for the month of October, inviting the faithful to pray for, quote, collaboration between different religious traditions. This is right out of Pope Francis's playbook. This is exactly the stuff Pope Francis did. What can different religious traditions collaborate on justly without falling into essentially lukewarmness, indifference, and essentially walking away from the faith? Maybe an end to a war, maybe. Putting out, if your neighbor's house is on fire, you're not going to go find out if they're Catholic or not first before you love your neighbor enough to help save their life and their property. Things like that. But the church has basically said otherwise. You can't collaborate with other religions. You can't. You cannot be so lukewarm as to deny the duties imposed on us by our profession of faith in Jesus Christ. I know that's hard for some people to hear. It is. It makes modern living really hard. Some lay reactions to this, I think, are interesting, though. One viewer said that this is a catastrophic tragedy. They said this in, as I posted this. Francis seemed to really dislike the sacrifice to Moloch, keyword is seemed, and called it what it was, though in practice he supported it through his promotion of the UN, the Sustainable Development Goals. This new fellow basically just told the world that it's no big deal. And this is in response to this posting here where more of the full quote is, where he talks about how these are all complex issues as I went over, and how essentially, you can't call yourself a supporter of life if you oppose open borders or are against sustainability or support the state having the right to dispatch with some particularly evil offenders who cannot be rehabilitated. Now, if you want to talk about the propensity, how often that punishment is applied as being a problem, sure, because that's still within church's teaching. If you want to object to certain methods, absolutely. I have problems with some of the very common methods for using that penalty in the US. I do, based on faith and our understanding of human dignity. But it's still not saying that the penalty itself is not allowed for the worst among them. And the idea that you can store these people away forever and ever actually is probably more harmful to their dignity as a human being than giving them a timetable to repent, really. I mean, honestly, to be brutally honest, but also puts other people in danger of these just absolutely monstrous figures. Dr. Ed Feezer on X, he's if you're not familiar with him, he's a professor of philosophy, a scholastic theologian, and of course a Catholic. In response to the Pope-splainers coming out of the woodwork, I could not have said what he says here better myself. He says, the Pope-splainers really need to knock it off with this Orwellian gaslighting. It just makes them look stupid or dishonest. There is no, gee, what did they really mean, ambiguity whatsoever in what Scripture or earlier popes on the capital punishment question, such as St. Innocent I, Innocent III, St. Pius V, St. Pius X, Pope Pius XII, etc., said about the issue of capital punishment. Indeed, in some cases, such as Innocent I and Innocent III, they spoke precisely to end debate on the matter and affirmed that the licety in principle on capital punishment is flatly a matter of Catholic orthodoxy, meaning it's allowed. It's a Catholic position to allow that punishment. There is lucid consistency on this issue until Francis, when he changed the catechism to fit his personal view. The Pope-splainers who pretend otherwise by suggesting that maybe everyone has somehow been misunderstanding everything for 2 millennia succeed in only living up to the worst stereotypes peddled by Protestant and atheist critics of Catholic apologetics. When they attribute to the Pope's greater discretion vis-a-vis doctrine than the Church herself has ever said they have, they do not uphold papal authority, but make a laughingstock out of it. In other words, when you defend these heterodox statements from Francis and now Leo, you make a mockery of papal authority. You're not defending it, because a pope does not have the right to change the teachings of the church. They're supposed to make them clearer. That's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to defend them and even apply them when we don't like it. And that is what that's what seamless theology just is against clarity, against the most clear teachings of the church that you could have. Instead, it muddies the waters by putting things on the same level as grave evil things. This issue, either capital punishment or the sacrifice to Moloch, they put on the same moral plane as widespread unemployment. I have seen and reported on those things here before. That they have said, well, if you aren't going to engage in economic activity in a very precisely progressive kind of way, by the way, from some of these same Chicago bishops, then you can't really claim to be against these other issues because they're on the same moral plane. It was until November last year that the U.S. bishops said the sacrifice that we're dancing around here was the preeminent moral issue facing the United States. And now that the laws on who can enter the country and cannot are being enforced and done so with ruthless efficiency, now they've changed their mind. And as I've reported, it's because they've lost billions of dollars since then. Now, Dr. Feeser posted this in response to one of the most notorious Pope-splaining accounts on X, saying, "The Pope is the sure guardian of doctrinal consistency." You wouldn't know it from his statement. If every laity thinks he is the guardian of doctrinal consistency, that's his job to interpret and harmonize tradition, even against the Pope. This leads to a disunity where each has different claims to the true tradition. No, what this does is when the Pope says things that are absolutely not Catholic, what it does is it destroys unity in the church and it destroys doctrinal clarity. That's what it does. And that's what we witnessed yesterday. Elizabeth Yore, posting on X, his blink rate is through the roof, absolutely unconscionable. This is Chicago clerical clout, scandalous. When she's talking about blink rate, she knows, or what she's saying is that the Pope knows what he's saying. And he knows what's going to come from it. So if you're waiting on some sort of clarity, if you're waiting on signs of unity, maybe even the Latin Mass being restored, I wouldn't count on it. And if it comes at the offer for trads to shut up, I will reject that. And anybody with a shred of a conscience who's speaking publicly about issues facing the church will reject it too. Souls are led astray by these erroneous teachings. Now, you might wonder, how does the public appear to support the Pope? This is an interesting thing. Brother Eccles is an English satirist. He's a Catholic who writes a Catholic blog. It's humorous, gets to the truth through humor. I wish I had that talent. Brother Eccles is a good follow if you're on X. He says, a slow decline in the Pope's popularity. Positive votes ABC. After 1 month, meaning from early May to early June, he had an 89.9% approval rating. 2 months in, it was down to 81.2%. 3 months in, 75.9%. 4 months in, 66.2%. Now, why is that? It's because people who are paying attention have seen what he's saying. Again, this viewer here says, and I know he's a viewer because I quoted him earlier, we message privately sometimes, he said, all I best base my assessment on are his reported words and deeds, especially those coming from the Vatican's website. I cannot read his mind, and the worst thing I can say about him is I have no idea what he personally believes. At this point, he gets a solid F from my perspective. Worse at any rate than even Francis at the same distance from election. To me, he reflects a formation in the culture of now classic liberal Catholic progressivism. The prelate who tosses out an orthodox statement every now and then while exhibiting the effects of stonecutter poisoning, trapped by the all-now cliche, boring, moldy old liberal Protestant encumbrances, out of date even for his evident secular humanist background. His responses to events demonstrate an embarrassingly predictable juggling of lame attempts at doctrinal pretense with an emotional connection so common to the ghastly modernist Catholic bishop. I pray for his transformative conversion. And I have seen that assessment from a whole lot of people yesterday after this story broke. People threw their hands up and said they were done giving him a chance. And this isn't because Senator Durbin is a Democrat. If he had said this in defense of a Republican who had the same position, which would be weird given their social positions, at least are rational. But if you had found let's say Mitt Romney had come out and said, oh, I'm not going to end that. I'm not going to restrict it. I'd spent his whole career fighting for that issue. It would have should have gotten the same backlash. But instead, he threw the entire movement in the U.S. to end this abominable practice under the bus. And the funniest thing about all this, because I think God has a sense of humor about things and will try to give us a little sign of levity from time to time. Right when this happened, Cardinal Blaise Cupich announced that Senator Durbin was turning down the Lifetime Achievement Award. That Lifetime Achievement Award that the Pope spoke about in defense of being given to the senator? The senator announced yesterday, and Cardinal Cupich repeated it right after this happened, the following. I'm going to read it to you in full. This is Chicago Seamless Theology completely. Senator Durbin today informed me, Cardinal Cupich, that he has decided not to receive an award at our Keep Hope Alive celebration. While I am saddened by this news, I respect his decision. But I want to make clear that the decision to present him an award was specifically in recognition of his singular contribution to immigration reform and his unwavering support of immigrants, which is so needed in our day. Let's pause here. This is Cardinal Cupich admitting what I've been telling you, that every other issue that he took a position on has been thrown out, and it was because of his support for, meaning his standing in opposition to the enforcement of the law on migration is why he was getting this award. Every other issue does not matter to them anymore. It is this issue, and it makes no sense unless you look at the amount of money we're talking about. Look holistically at this issue. The Doge efforts, you remember those? That all went away, kind of, mostly going on behind the scenes now. You're seeing this now in the government shutdown. Democrats are threatening to basically allow the government shutdown to go on indefinitely unless they get free health care for these people brought back in at your expense. And for funding of medical procedures to help people just deny the nature of their own flesh. And all these other things that are unequivocal evils. And the bishops have been caught in support of all of it. Billions of dollars were at stake for the bishops. This is why this is the only thing they care about now. Salvation of souls, whatever. But allowing untold millions of people into the country so that they can then be exploited by politically cynical people and for financial gain for some corporations. Oh yeah, let's keep that going. That's the U.S. bishops. Let's continue with Cardinal Cupich. Yet I would be remiss if I did not take this opportunity to share some additional thoughts which I offer as your pastor. As I look back on my 50 years as a priest and 27 years as a bishop, I have seen the divisions within the Catholic community dangerously deepen. These divisions harm the unity of the church and undermine our witness to the gospel. Bishops cannot simply ignore the situation because we have a duty to promote unity and assist all Catholics to embrace the teachings of the church as a consistent whole. The tragedy of our current situation in the U.S. is that Catholics find themselves politically homeless. The policies of neither political party perfectly encapsulate the breadth of Catholic teaching. Additionally, polling tends to show that when it comes to public policies, Catholics themselves remain divided along partisan lines, much like all Americans. This impasse has become more entrenched over the years, and our divisions undermine our calling to the witness of the gospel. I'm going to pause here. Nothing he said there is wrong. In fact, this is how the modernists do it. They will teach you a lot of truth. And that is how they get you to swallow the pill of error. The controversy of these past days points to the depth and danger of such an impasse. Some would say that the church should never honor a political leader if he pursues policies diametrically opposed to critical elements of Catholic social teaching. But the tragic reality in our nation today is that there are essentially no Catholic public officials who consistently pursue the essential elements of Catholic social teaching because our party system will not permit them to do so. Again, he's not wrong. I've been critical of J.D. Vance, whom I like because of his stance on IVF. And you might have noticed that the Trump administration has quietly abandoned the IVF thing, going so far as to say they won't be pursuing it anymore. But I have still been critical of Vice President Vance for his position on that. Total condemnation is not the way forward, according to Cupich, for it shuts down discussion. But praise and encouragement can open it up by asking their recipients to consider how to extend their good work to other areas and issues. More broadly, a positive approach can keep alive the hope that it's worth talking to one another and collaborating with one another to promote the common good. No one wants to engage with someone who treats them as a thoroughgoing moral threat to the community. But people will engage with and may even learn from those who recognize them as making some contribution to a common endeavor. Now, what Cupich is doing here is defending seamless garment theology and seamless garment as a strategy. We should all be disturbed that the present impasse continues to significantly hamper the church's efforts to promote human dignity across the full range of issues. There it is, full range of issues. Indeed, the child in the womb, the sick and elderly, the migrant and refugee, the person who is waiting for capital punishment, those already suffering from the thermometer problem, another thing you can't criticize on these platforms, and generational poverty will continue to be at risk if we as Catholics do not start talking to each other respectfully and work together. And what he just did there is put them all on the same moral plane. All those issues. Seamless garment theology. That includes listening. And now here we are, invoking synodality. This way of being church, of being human, one might even call synodal. And it is this path, beautifully laid out for us by our late beloved Holy Father, Pope Francis, which can lead all Catholics to embrace the fullness of our teachings. Such witness would undoubtedly serve society by building up the common good. My hope was that our Keep Hope Alive celebration would serve as an invitation to Catholics who fiercely defend the vulnerable on the border between the U.S. and Mexico to ponder why the Church defends the vulnerable on the border between life and death, as in cases of the sacrifice of the most young vulnerable and the sacrifice of the most old vulnerable. If you want to put issues on a similar plane, they're still not the same, but at least you could make at least a case that they're of similar enough moral weight that you can almost compare them, those two issues. Sacrifice for the same reason, convenience. Likewise, it could be an invitation to Catholics who tirelessly promote the dignity of the unborn, the elderly, and the sick to extend the circle of protection to immigrants facing in this present moment an existential threat to their lives and their lives of their families. And he just goes on like that. Cardinal Cupich won. The award might not be being given out to the senator, but Cardinal Cupich won the debate. He now has the full backing of the Pope. Because what this is about is seamless garment theology, being used to push the full weight of the church against the migration enforcement efforts of the Trump administration. And it's so weird to say that. This is modernism, folks. Church's Catholic says, so frustrating, this abuse of the word dignity. It's almost lost all meaning. It's like all those pejoratives that progressives call conservatives. They've all lost all meaning. All of them, which is kind of a tragedy because you'd actually like to be able to know if someone is actually authentically against other people based solely on their flesh, on their appearance of their skin, on their ethnicity. You'd like to know that. But unfortunately, the progressives throw that word around so much that it means nothing. Or they call everybody the bad guys from World War II. It means nothing. Although when they do that, that is a classic tactic that goes back to Trotsky. Yes, that Leon Trotsky from the Soviet Union, the Marxist leader there, he developed that term. He's the one who decided to call everybody basically the World War II Germans as a Marxist strategy. Something to know that they've been doing this since the 1930s. Anybody who is essentially to the right of probably today Hillary Clinton gets that label thrown at them. It is a classic Marxist tactic. He was very open about it. Very well documented. So every time you hear somebody throwing that around, they're oftentimes unwittingly a Marxist. I'm curious what you think about this. Let me know in the comments, please. Please pray for Pope Leo and pray for Senator Durbin. It's the one thing you didn't see in any of that was a concern for Senator Durbin's soul and the souls of those who will see what the Pope said and be led astray. Pray for them. Salvation of souls is the first law of the church. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly does help. Sharing this on social media helps too. Again, pray for the church. Pray for everybody who spoke about negatively today. They need your prayers. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.